How you doing? Hey, I'm patnull, and thanks for joining me. Welcome to part 2 of my Chapters Basics series. Last week we talked about where every chapter has certain similarities in common. Or some of those similarities include the voices, how you choose what voice to use, and advantages and disadvantages of each, how you choose your POV, how you choose your tense. This week we're going to talk about everything else, and which we will do right on the other side of this brief intro. Hey, welcome back. See, that didn't take too long, did it? Seriously. Do you really need that intro? I think it's pretty cool. So last week we talked about how every chapter has certain similarities, which would include the voice, the POV, and the tense. So moving on to similarity number 4. The length. See, every chapter has a length. Whether it's short or whether it's long. But how long do you actually make a chapter? I mean, is there a certain formula you follow? Can it be too short or too long? Not really. That decision is ultimately up to you. See, every chapter is as long as it needs to be. But I can offer you a guideline on how to construct each chapter. See, if every chapter is made up of certain scenes, then every scene should be constructed a certain way. And once you've constructed it, then you can make it as long or as short as you want. And they usually fall into 2 categories. Category number 1, you usually have your goal, your conflict, and your disaster scene. Something that befalls the main protagonist from getting what he wants. Category number 2, you usually have your reaction, your problem, or your dilemma. It's where your main protagonist is deciding between 2 or more courses of action. And your decision, where he comes to a decision regarding that problem. In a goal, conflict, and disaster scene, the POV character usually has a goal that he wants to achieve by the end of the scene. So, for example, maybe in a story, a little boy wants the cookies that's in the cookie jar on the counter. So that's his goal. So once you've established his goal, then we move on to the conflict. All sorts of conflict that's going to prevent him from reaching those cookies. So maybe he's too short. So then he decides to drag a chair over to get the cookies. But then his dad comes home. So he has to wait for his dad to leave the kitchen. And once he does that, he decides to try again. But then the telephone rings and his mom comes in to answer the telephone. Maybe it's set in the 80s and they don't have cell phones. Maybe she's just old-fashioned that way and they have a landline. I don't know. But she's talking on the phone forever. And the little boy's just waiting patiently for her to leave so he can go finally get his cookies. Well, she finally does. She hangs up, she leaves. And finally here's his chance. She goes to get the cookies. But see, now we move on to the disaster scene. See, the mother knows how her little boy's mind works and she was just spying on him. And so she walks into the kitchen right when he's reaching his hand to the cookie jars, caught him in the act, spanks him on the bottom, and moves the cookies onto the refrigerator completely out of his reach. That's the disaster. You can also have a reaction, a problem, and a decision structure to your scene. And this sort of scene usually follows from the goal, the conflict, and the disaster scene. So, in a reaction, a problem, and a decision scene, you're first going to have a reaction. The little boy is going to react to the disaster in some way. When the mother came in and spanked his bottom and moved the cookies onto the cookie jar, he's going to react. Because if he doesn't react, then the character's just not going to be believable. He's not going to be believable. So he's either going to, he's probably going to cry. He's going to rub his bottom. He's going to stamp his feet. He's going to cross his arms. He's going to pout. Those are all legitimate reactions to the disaster that happened to him. But once he gets through the reaction, then we move on to the problem part of the scene. How is he going to get the cookies that's on top of the refrigerator? He's too short. Even if he moves the chair over, he's not going to be able to reach them. How is he going to get them? So he's going to think through all his available options. And once he does that, he's going to come to a decision. And the decision is this. He's going to bribe his older brother to go get them. Because if he doesn't, he's going to tell mom and dad that the older brother has a stash of nudie magazines stashed under his bed. Now, a story is made up of many goals. You usually have your main goal, the main storyline, and tons of little goals littered along the way. But you can't have your main character solve the main goal right away, or there is no story. But there are little goals he'll be able to solve. For example, like in a romance, the main goal is always the female trying to get the male or the male trying to get the female. And once they actually hook up, the story officially ends. But there are little goals that they will solve along the way. Like maybe he needs to find out where she lives. He needs to ask her out first. He needs to convince her that he's not the egotistical pig that she thinks he is. Or he needs to convince his friends that she is really the one and not just another notch in his headboard. The point I'm trying to make is that with these little goals, you can't keep having your POV character keep failing. Eventually he will achieve a small goal just to make some forward progress. But when that happens, usually another goal springs into place, or something bad happens that nullifies this apparent victory. Similarity number 5. All chapters have a beginning. Shush it! I know what you're gonna say. Thank you, Captain Obvious. You said it, not me. Well, it's true, but is there a way to begin a chapter? I'm going to divide this into 2 sections. The first chapter and every chapter after that. So first of all, let's talk about the first chapter. The goal here is to throw your line out.
I cast the line and wait for the show.
Hook readers, reel them in, and keep them engaged through the rest of the story. Because of this, first chapters usually have different rules than the rest of the chapters that follow. Because if a reader can't get through your first chapter, they will usually put the book down. If they're browsing your book in a bookstore or they're browsing online and they put the book down, this usually equates to a lost sale and a potential fan. First, let me tell you how not to start a story, and I have 3 tips for that. Tip number 1, do not start a story with backstory. And in general, it's a good idea not to have a lot of backstory in your story anyways. Most of the backstory you have for your characters, you're not going to include in your novel. Just because it might be exciting to you, but it's not going to be exciting for the readers. So in general, just don't have a lot of backstory in your novel. But in particular, do not start your novel with backstory. This will absolutely kill your story. For example, we don't need to know the details of how Marty fell from a 20-foot ladder, severed his spine, and is paralyzed from the waist down. No, show it in other ways. Show him riding around in his wheelchair. Show his embarrassment of having dropped a glass and he can't pick it up. Past action equals boring. Current action, mesmerizing. Tip number 2, don't begin your story with dialogue. Now this idea might be polarizing, it might be just my personal preference, but we need context. Okay, we need a setting to ground us and anchor us into the scene. If you begin a story with dialogue, we're not going to care what is being said because we don't know who the characters are. For example, a conversation between 2 strangers is going to be far less significant than a conversation between your 2 best friends because you know who their names are, you know their likes, their dislikes, their interests. Okay, so give us something about the characters before you just start to have them start speaking. Again, I just want to throw this out there. This is just my own personal opinion. Tip number 3. Don't have one of your characters waking up in the first chapter. Please don't do this. It's boring and will literally put your readers to sleep. Hey, that's kind of funny. While your character's waking up, your readers are sleeping. Never mind. Having your character wake up is not only uninspired, it's such a mundane part of life. And readers read books to escape the mundane. They read it to escape, to basically go somewhere fantastical, to go somewhere mysterious and intriguing, to escape into another world. And to start your first chapter with a character waking up, it's not going to capture their interest as much as it should, because it's boring. That's not to say that a character can never wake up in your story. Just don't do it in the first chapter, because the first chapter's job is to reel your readers in and hook them and keep them engaged. And having someone wake up, which is an ordinary part of life, is not going to do the job. It's a bad way to start a first chapter. So my advice to you, my tip is to just not start a chapter that way. Correction, don't start your first chapter that way. Okay, so how do you begin your first chapter? Begin with a riveting first line, a line that will first hook your readers and then keep them engaged and engrossed to the end of the paragraph. and then to the end of the page, and then to the end of the chapter, and then to the end of the book. You can do that by having the line be mysterious and intriguing, by introducing your character perhaps in an unexpected way, by having a detail about the character that stands out, by establishing tone, by introducing a setting, by having action, by having conflict, by having an inherent question where the line ends with an invisible question mark. For example, in Andy Palaquin's, and I hope I'm not butchering your last name, I'm so terrible with last names, his indie book, Blade of the Destroyer, The Last Bukalari, I hope I'm not butchering that name either, which I probably am, book 1, the first line of his book starts with, "Eyes the color of night watched Lord de Moria plunge to the forest floor." So some inherent questions might be, who's Lord de Moria? What's happening? Why is he plunging? Who's watching him? It's intriguing and mysterious. It has an inherent question, or several inherent questions. It establishes the tone of killing and death throughout the novel, and it introduces a setting, the forest floor. This is an example of a great first line. Okay, so I know I went through that pretty quickly, but really, how to write the beginning to your first chapter in your novel can be a video in itself. But what about the other chapters? How do we write those? The rules aren't so rigid. You can open with action. You can open with conflict. You can open with maybe an interesting setting. You can open with something that's intriguing and mysterious. You can open with dialogue. You can, if you ended your last chapter with a cliffhanger, you can either switch scenes and the POV characters, thus making your readers squirm in their seats because all they want to do is see the ending to the cliffhanger, thus heightening the suspense, or you could just simply resolve the cliffhanger. Okay, so when I first started this series, I didn't realize how much information there was to each topic, so I'm gonna have another video in this chapter basics series, and it should be my last video. I should have probably planned this out better. But let me tell you the lineup I'm gonna have for the next 2 weeks. Next week I'm gonna be taking a break from this series, and I'm going to be reviewing Andy Palaquin's Blade of the Destroyer book, and I cannot wait to tell you guys what I thought of it. And then the week after that, I'll be returning to Chapter Basics series, where I'll be talking about how to end your chapter, and I have lots of tips for that. You don't want to miss it. I'm going to be talking about how to name your chapters, and finally conflict. And then the week after that, I'm going to be reviewing Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. Thanks for joining me so much on this wonderful Saturday. You guys are all awesome. If you liked what you saw, please smash that like button like a boss. And if you liked me, I think I'm a pretty nice guy. And if you liked my content, then please subscribe. You can reach me at Patrick Sheffield Null on Facebook or Pat221 on Twitter. Those links will be in the description and at the end of this video. And I hope that I have unpacked your inner writer a little at a time. No, that's supposed to be at the beginning of my video. Anyways, happy writing, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.